surgeon in New York City, and I'm also the president-elect of ASMBS, and it's been my honor to be asked to moderate this session, our World Obesity Day Roundtable. And I want to introduce our panelists to you all, and then we'll get down to some important questions. First is Dr. Scott Sikora. He's the director of the Center for Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery at Brigham and Women's Hospital and a professor of surgery at Harvard Medical School. He is also both a past president of the American Society for Metabolic and Bariatric Surgery, or ASMBS, and he is the current president of IFSO. Dr. Peter Schwartz is the head of the Division for Prevention and Care of Diabetes. His research covers molecular and clinical mechanisms to treat and prevent type 2 diabetes. He's also developing and evaluating digital tools like mobile smartphone apps targeting the common lifestyle-associated risk factors of diabetes, and he is the president-elect of the International Diabetes Foundation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Guillermo Macedo is director of the gastroenterology department at Centro Hospitalar e Universitario São João in Porto. He's director of the World Gastroenterology Organization Training Center in Porto. He's an invited full professor at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Porto, president of the Sociedad Portuguesa de Gastroenterology, and the president of the World Gastroenterology Organization. Donna Ryan, who I've known for many years and who is as charming as she is insightful on obesity medicine. She's a professor emerita at Pennington Biomedical in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She oversaw clinical research there for 25 years. She's been involved in many, many studies, including pounds lost, look ahead, DPP, and DASH. She also, I didn't know this, worked for the US Department of Defense for a series of awards which targeted military nutrition, where she was trying to improve readiness and performance, and she must have been a consultant for Universal Soldier or one of those other great movies. And she was president of the Obesity Society, and she is a master of obesity medicine, which is a designation by the American Board of Obesity Medicine. And she is a past president of the World Obesity Federation. And that is everyone. Yeah, thank you guys. This is so wonderful for all of us to join. I know, and we have a lot of people registered for this. But you know, we had formulated some questions for our panel to really discuss, because you know, this is really about how to change the perception of obesity and talk about it as the disease that we all know and treat. But so one of the questions that came up, which I would ask to everyone, and then I'll take turns. We can, we'll start with Donna, and then we can go through to Guillermo, and then Peter, and then Scott. So one question is, less than 10 years ago, the majority of people were still talking about calories in and calories out as a way to tackle obesity. How did the understanding of obesity change so that that is not our conversation, and how has that changed in your practice? And you've always been, Donna, really ahead of the curve on obesity medications and treatments. So
I haven't always been ahead of the curve. You know, when I first went to work at the Pennington Center in the late 1980s, I remember one of the first things that I asked the director, George Bray, who's the father of obesity research. One of the first things I asked him, I said, George, isn't it just a problem that our patients are just eating too much and they're not moving enough? So yeah, I think this attitude is very pervasive. I think what's happened is research and the discovery that our regulation of body weight is very much biologically determined, and that our risk for accruing excess weight in the modern environment is influenced largely by genetics, but by many other factors as well, by how much and how well we're sleeping, by what other medications we're taking, by other risk factors. So I think the way that we look at obesity now is that individuals who are at genetic risk have been exposed to a very obesogenic environment. And once we develop excess body weight, our body defends its highest fat mass. And so our understanding of obesity as biology is really driving better treatments for obesity, also biologic. Unfortunately, not all of our physicians are there yet in understanding the biologic basis of obesity. And hence, many of our patients are not there yet either. So I think it's widely misunderstood that that we can easily control our body weight. We can't.
Peter?
Yeah, welcome everyone. The fact is that I believe that for this question, I believe that the most striking paradigm change was achieved when we all realized that the complex biological condition defined as obesity is a disability, which is a characteristic and not a defining feature. So the coming of age of a new attitude, a new mindset, allowed us to mentally and even physically be able to cope appropriately with these patients. Gaining this conscience, a sort of mindfulness of health providers considering this complex condition, is the cornerstone of any change that we want to induce in doctors' behaviors. So obesity is not an issue of personal responsibility, and this has to be shown, explained, deconstructed, so that we might have a true role fighting against stigma. Well, GI community has been realizing that within the spectrum of associated diseases, beyond metabolic dysfunction, cardiovascular morbidity, or psychosocial impact, we do have very serious conditions from our own playground, like GI cancers or ubiquitarian liver problems coming from MAFLD, from metabolic associated fatty liver disease range, and biomechanical disability, which is not just a fancy name for GERD, which is reflux disease. So we are understanding that one of our beloved weapons, digestive endoscopy, can play a decisive role in managing these patients. So enthusiasm, curiosity, and expectations are still growing among the GI community, among gastroenterologists. And we enjoy being part of the solution. We know that the treatment goals should be individualized, considering the patients, of course, but also that we do play a role in those equations.
Hey, Peter, thank you for that, Guillermo.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting already to listen to the first two speakers focusing on obesity, because I'm coming from a different field and have a different glasses onto a different point of view, because I always like to think the story from the end. And the end for many people is obesity, is cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And diabetes is our business, we could say, in to treat these people and to prevent diabetes. And the prevention of diabetes is our link from the diabetes community into obesity. And if I'm honest, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, as you formulated your question, we were not thinking so much about obesity. We said we focus on glycemia, we focus on insulin resistance, and we treat our diabetes patients well. But with the common understanding, which is growing, that we can prevent diabetes, and that we, in some cases, we even can reach a remission of diabetes, we basically come back and, as scientists, look into obesity as a precursor of diabetes, or a pre-diabetic insulin-resistant situation. And what is driving us is to understand or to dissect obesity. And this is, in my eyes, what is the most exciting new information in the last 10 years, that there's not one obesity. That, like Guillermo just said, liver fat seems to play a much more important role than we thought 10 years ago. And the interplay between liver fat and visceral fat is, for some patients, the main driver of gaining obesity, and for others not. But for the diabetes community, it makes a diabetes patient becoming a non-responder, for example, to physical activity, a non-responder to some of the anti-diabetic drugs. And this is the business, or this is where our business is affected. And for us, it's a fascinating journey to look into the pathomechanisms of diabetes and obesity, or the common pathomechanisms of both. Because in the last 10 years, we also gained numerous new drugs to treat diabetes, like the GLP-1 analogs, And we see that treating diabetes in this patient is going along with a significant reduction of obesity. So we ask our question, is it really a diabetes drug or is it an obesity drug? And many of my colleagues say it's not a diabetes drug, it's an obesity drug. So the common pathophysiology of both diseases tells us that we tackle one, we also may provide a solution for the second one, and vice versa. And as a final statement, what we experience here in Germany and in many European countries is there is no outpatient treatment for obesity. It's not reimbursed, it's not existing, there are no patient pathways, there's no infrastructure. But what is coming now, and this is development in the last 2 years, we call it digital health applications, so apps which are reimbursed by the healthcare system, and they are very, very, very successful in the obesity treatment sector. So there are 10,000s of patients, so significantly more than any group of patients who are having an inpatient obesity treatment. There are 10,000 of patients using apps for weight reduction, and they work very well with a sustainable effect on reducing body weight. So for us, it's a fascinating new journey in the common understanding of diabetes and obesity.
Thank you, Peter. I have questions, but I want to hear from Scott first. So again, Scott, people were talking about calories in and calories out, but were we as surgeons so?
Well, I'll get us there. First, I want to say it's a tough act to follow the previous speakers. They all so elegantly made their cases, particularly Donna. I probably would have said almost everything word for word, but not nearly as smoothly as you did. I want to tie it a little bit back to surgery. One of the major changes in more than 10 years now was when we went from doing open surgery with very big morbidity and mortality, with very poor results, a lot of recidivism, hospital stays of 7 to 8 days routinely, through the laparoscopic era to where we are now, where patients go home the same day, the results are better, the risks are dramatically reduced. For instance, the 30-day mortality for a sleeve is 0.1%, which is lower than appendectomy. And we're accomplishing that across the world. So that was a major thing. It's changed the whole paradigm of how people viewed surgery, where at one time it was just basically a very dangerous operation. You're lucky if you survived it, and then you're even luckier if you ever had any good results. And ultimately, it probably was going to fail long term, to a whole different world. The other point I want to make is we talked a little bit previously, Peter mentioned the medications. And the medications came on because they are mimicking the effects of surgery. When we realized that our operations didn't just reduce how much one ate, but had all these hormonal and neuronal changes that affected weight, blood, metabolic disorders, including diabetes, we realized that there was a whole nother game here, which then led the pharmaceutical industry to spend how many millions and millions of dollars to develop these medications. And I have to say, as a non-participant, because I don't prescribe medications, I'm impressed every time I see a patient of mine who is placed on it because of the great results that they're seeing with these new medications that were created because of the effect that we know it has on GLP-1 or PYY or whatever. So we're in a whole new world with the management of people with weight problems, and we're seeing much better results and very low morbidity to get there. So it's a really exciting time to be in the field.
The question I have is, so, well, we recognize obesity. I think Donna and also Guilherme, you brought out that it's fine for us to know it, but how are we changing all the other physicians? ASMBS has worked in the past with many other US organizations, held an obesity summit. One of our past presidents, John Morton, did that. And we had great guidelines that came through, a lot of meeting of the minds. And yet when it came to implementation and seeing more patients to surgery, it didn't happen. And it makes me think, though, when I look at all the patients I've seen, because I also do some medical weight loss, Donna. So, the patients I've seen that have obesity and not surgical candidates, their primary care doctors don't know what to do with them. They're like, yeah, we'll see her. and they're sending them to a surgeon thinking that maybe they could be a candidate. So we haven't really reached our physicians in a way that we've moved the needle on the treatment of obesity itself, irrespective of whether we're treating patients with severe obesity who would benefit from surgery.
You know what was very telling where I work, we have a very large medical community of physicians, primary care doctors, specialists, et cetera, medical doctors. And they were surveyed about, what they're comfortable asking their patients, what they're not comfortable. And what was really telling for me was the majority of these doctors said they were more comfortable talking about sexual history than they were about obesity.
Huh.
That's strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been a shocking lack of education about obesity in medical
Right.
schools or in training. We haven't taught the underlying biology of obesity as a disease. And we haven't taught physicians how to interact with their patients. Unfortunately, I think the long history of medicine is that weight management has been in the realm of the patient's responsibility. I mean, the physicians have really pushed everything onto the patient. And patients have not historically come to their physician or even nurse practitioner for advice about how to lose weight. The surgeons, as you said, Scott, you really led the way. And even to this day, our most effective in terms of producing weight loss and improving health, our most effective treatment and most durable treatment is bariatric surgery. But we learned from that surgery how to develop medications that can mimic some of the biology of bariatric surgery. And I guarantee you, Scott, you're going to learn how to prescribe those medicines.
Well,
You will.
I have such an excellent team. It spoiled me with
Yes.
Carolina Povian and her people. So,
Well,
I
there
just
you
didn't
go.
let them do it, but you're right.
I do think but I'm so glad you used that word team. It is a team approach that's needed. But it all begins with the patient. So the patient has to first of all seek help from physicians who are committed. And historically, they haven't felt comfortable talking about their weight to their physicians. They feel judged.
John, ASMBS did a NORC survey. So we surveyed, I think it was like 3,000 patients, maybe a little less. I might be a little wrong on the numbers. And they did two of them, one before COVID, one after. Before COVID, patients were asked if they thought they had obesity. And these were patients who had BMI 30 to 35. And they were like, no, we don't think we have obesity. And in many times, it's because their friends and families look like them, right?
Yeah.
So my question is for Peter and for Guilherme, is this also something that you're seeing in other countries where there's a lack of recognition by the patient?
It's very interesting to listen to you about this problem, because I was smiling because it actually describes exactly what is the situation in Europe. And I would go a step further. It's not only that physicians are not educated, we actually actively stigmatize the patient and say, okay, this is the fault of the patient, eat less, and then because you're eating too much, you drink too much alcohol and so on. So it's your fault as patient that you are obese. So this translation that it's a disease, that it's like Donna has said, there is a clear genetic background. It's a catalysator basically, or the bottleneck for most of all the other common chronic diseases we know. And this understanding is not in the broad medical community arrived yet. And if you go into countries, let's say in Africa, there the situation again is totally different, because there is obesity seen as a sign of wealth. So it's attractive to be obese. It's attractive to have obese women or an obese man. And it will take even longer there to find this switch into the understanding of obesity as a common precursor of many other diseases. And then we have to go a long way to also to bring the treatment into understanding. But like you said to Scott, he will learn to use drugs. This is our daily business. But a short example as well, in Germany, the GLP-1s and now also in future, the tildacerfide is reimbursed for the treatment of diabetes, but not obesity. So the patient has to pay himself for obesity treatment. And now imagine you are a patient. What does this tell you? So yeah, obesity is not a problem, but diabetes is. And this is the wrong paradigm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I have to tell you that that's the same issue. We're in Europe, in Portugal, we witness exactly the same thing. And the fact is that we need to keep in mind that there is still a large treatment gap for most people living with excess weight. So we are failing somewhere in this journey. We are failing. And one important reason, in my view, is the number of misconceptions around obesity, and they may cause real harm to those living with this condition. That's a fact.
Yes.
We need to realize that it is a chronic, long-standing disease influenced by many factors: genetic, behavioral, of course, environmental, and even economic. So right from the start, we have many targets to strike, and that brings difficulties to any strategy of creating an efficient plan to tackle any sort of disease. There is the weight bias, many negative stereotypes associated with it, and to effectively communicate many issues related to this complex disease, we need to care about the way we address our patients and how we approach the media players. Also, there's a lack. Yeah, I think the media is at this time is really important for us to deal with. We will have a specific great opportunity to do that, all of us, because I tell you this because just yesterday, we premiered here in Portugal a movie that I think it will be will have at least one Oscar, at least, which is The Whale, and that will bring a great chance of discussing these several problems of patients with obesity within the community. So there will be a chance in the coming weeks for sure. Again, there's a lack of validated, accredited, widely available information stating that obesity is a treatable medical condition. And that needs several measures strategically undertaken, such as weight loss, weight maintenance, symptoms control. And it should be clearly assumed that there are ways of achieving all of this, so we can provide solutions, and patients must be aware of that.
I just want to, especially from your focus as a gastroenterologist, we've done a great job at letting people know, gee, high blood pressure is bad. Done a great job of doing diabetes is bad, and we need to treat that. And part of the treatment is weight loss, high blood pressure similarly. We've not done a great job about this epidemic we're facing of NAFLD, right? Which is and fatty liver, and how progressive it is, and how most of our patients that Scott and I see have it, and many of the patients with obesity have it, and not to mention our Asian counterparts who have fatty liver at a much lower BMI.
Yeah.
How are we going to make that change? And it's that this is what World Obesity Day and this discussion is about, is trying to reach all of our clinicians to really say, this is also a major issue that has to be treated. And just saying to lose weight isn't enough. We need to really, there's actually, I think the FDA approved one drug recently for fatty liver, Guilherme, if I'm not wrong, but yes, otherwise it's all weight loss.
But the thing is that what we, at least from, let's say, the GI and liver community, we want to show is that to make people realize that when you have excess weight, your liver is suffering. But never forget that the liver is a very silent organ. And so it's very difficult for people to acknowledge without having some blood tests. And because in ancient times, we used to go to liver biopsies for every reason, nowadays, for this particular reason, we perhaps don't need liver biopsies as we used to, because elastography is a non-invasive procedure, and we can really testify that someone has a MAFLD. Now, the different stages of MAFLD is important to understand and to tell people that they might have liver cirrhosis. So I think when we come up with different actors within this stage, and now the new actors will be, in fact, GI community with endoscopy and the liver community. If everyone stays on board, perhaps it will be easier to make all of these things be understandable for everyone. So
Well, you know,
that relates to the issue of getting guidelines. And
I hear,
for
Guillermo,
everyone.
that you guys have to, over at WGO, create a worldwide campaign to help, a PSA, if you will. Donna, you were going to say?
yeah, so yeah, you're absolutely right, Guillermo. I mean, the real driver of that fatty liver disease and NASH and hepatocellular carcinoma, and now in the US, the leading cause of liver transplant is the underlying root cause is obesity.
Right.
And Peter, as you well know, the big driver of our diabetes epidemic is the obesity epidemic. So I see some positive things happening. I don't want to be entirely negative here. I see the Diabetes Society putting in recommendations that we be more weight-centric in our approach to diabetes, that we really encourage treating obesity because we're moving upstream in the disease process. We're treating not just glycemia, but we're also treating obstructive sleep apnea, abnormal lipids, high blood pressure. So weight, that excess weight is really the driver of our chronic diseases, our non-communicable diseases. And we absolutely must get in there. Guillermo, you said something about the real issue is with funding, and that's one of the barriers that keeps our patients from getting good care. Well, I think our bariatric surgery has shown us the way. We've gotten Medicare in the United States to cover bariatric surgery, and we're doing pretty well in getting coverage for bariatric surgery. We're just beginning to see better payment for medications, and it's because we're finally getting some better medications. Lifestyle intervention has always been a challenge to get payment for, but I'm still not going to be negative about that. I think we are hopeful. Many times now, our employers are covering wellness programs that address weight, and that seems to actually be working. So I think we're making progress, but payment is not the only reason that patients are not seeking care. We all know this. One of the reasons is that I think patients blame themselves for their weight. They own their body weight. I think we need to make our offices, our practices, non-judgmental about people's body size. All our patients are beautiful. We want to improve their health. So the way to do that is to get the patients and have them keep coming back. So we absolutely must address this issue of stigma.
Yeah, we can't let patients off the hook, though. We have to give them some responsibility in their care as well.
Yeah.
Is there any question why 75% of candidates are women? We know that obesity is pretty equal amongst the genders. So why is it that so many more women have surgery? Well, it's perception, and it's how they view their bodies. The first time a woman is insulted by her husband that she's overweight, she's at the bariatric clinic. But the gentleman who is overweight, he's big, he's macho. Nobody's going to pick a fight with him because he's big. He's got a big tattoo on his big bicep. Yet he's not going to come see us until he develops diabetes. So we have to educate them that this is a real disease. A patient yesterday, a longstanding patient of mine in clinic said, yeah, this obesity is like a disease. I said, no, it's not like a disease. And I went through the whole thing and then realized that I was getting very emotional to try to educate her. This is a real disease, just like diabetes, just like sleep apnea, just like heart disease. And maybe it needs 2 operations to cure it over a lifetime. Well, that's okay for cancer. Why isn't it okay for obesity? So the lay people have to understand what they're dealing with, because they're looking and saying, well, I'm a big guy. Nobody's going to pick a fight with me.
I would like to put the positive aspect into to answer your question. What can we do to reframe this thinking also on our patient side? And what we see is exactly the same, that patient is not perceiving obesity as a disease, but they see MAFLD as a disease. They see liver fat as a problem. And they tell me, yeah, I don't care about my body weight, but I care about the fat in my liver. And because of any reason, I cannot fully explain this. This seems much more dangerous than the body weight. And we use this. And if I explain the patient, if you have 150 grams of fat in the liver, you become to a non-responder for physical activity. That helps the patient to switch and say, oh, I don't want to have this. And then they start thinking what they can do to remove liver fat or to reduce liver fat. And this is a motivational aspect for them also to tackle obesity or understand the problem of obesity. And I see that the same reframing can take place for our colleagues, because even many of our colleagues don't see obesity as a medical problem. They see it as a fault of the patient. So if we discuss it, it does not mean that all our colleagues see it the same. And this is our obligation as international organizations to educate our colleagues to reframe this for themselves and for the patient.
I do want to ask some of the questions that have been asked from the viewers. So one of them, and Peter, I want you to start, but I think Donna, you also have some of this through Pennington. How can digital health support ensure multidisciplinary care for people living with obesity? And that's from Cherie Bryant.
Our experience is it's basically the treatment out of the pocket of the patient. Using the smartphone, we are in the pocket of our patient, and we never have been so close to our patient than in the pocket of the patient. And we are taking about 1,800 decisions every day, and about 500 decisions are related to our lifestyle, to our behavior. And if the apps on the smartphone, and we call it digiceuticals on the smartphone, if they are able to, in the right moment, with the right message, with the right motivational strategy, to set impulses to influence these decisions on a day, then I think digital health can be very, very successful. But it's not the treatment of obesity, it's supporting the patient for better self-management and changing behavior. And this may be translated in weight reduction. It may be translated in better self-management for diabetes care or better blood pressure management. And we have very good examples with digital health applications in Germany, where the patient lose continuously over 1.5 years. They do not exist longer than 1.5 years, but continuously lose body weight. And this is very promising. So I think it's a fascinating new opportunity to have the coach or to have the physician or the treatment in the pocket of the patient.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I still think that the best thing to achieve changing behaviors is education. It's a synonym. Education means changing behaviors, sustained in a sustained way, in something that will evolve in the future. So those who are involved in education are the prime targets. And so I believe that the doctors are upstream this problem. So very likely it is our role as doctors, doctors in general sense, of course, doctors, surgeons, everyone on board. And when we have to keep everyone looking for their own patients, trying to achieve something that will not be achieved only with a pill or one specific endoscopic or surgical procedure. It's much more than that. And when we be successful doing that, people will really understand that this is a pandemic. It's not a pandemic really because it's not a virus or a bacteria, but it's really everywhere. And so people tend, or there's a trend of not being so sensitive about having excess weight. And this is exactly where we should go. But that means changing the minds of the doctors.
Donna, you've done some
Yeah.
work with apps
Yes.
and outreach.
Yeah, some of the things I like to do best on the apps are the self-monitoring apps. You know, so a key fundamental in changing behaviors is measurement. So if you want something to change, you've got to first measure it. So we like to measure food intake. We like to measure physical activity. We love to measure weight. We want to see a weight loss trajectory that is within certain bounds. And in fact, our bariatric surgeons have some great apps that predict post-bariatric surgery weight loss. And we use this to monitor people. But there's another thing that's really wonderful that's happening that's impacting obesity treatment, and that is telehealth. Telehealth is ideal for weight management. And we learned this in the pandemic. In fact, we know, we've published on this, that patients are more likely to keep their telehealth appointment than they are to keep their in-person appointment. So it's a real way to get to patients where they are.
Well, if you think about what a patient has to do to come to the appointment with you, they may have to drive into a major city. A lot of people don't like to drive in Boston. They're going to
Pay
park
for
their car,
parking.
it's $30. In
Yeah.
addition, they have to have somebody watch the kids, or they have to take off from work. They sit in the clinic for God knows how long because we all run late. And then it's a 15-minute, how are you? You look great. How are you doing with your diet? Goodbye. They're not getting anything out of that. It's burdensome. It's expensive. I'm a big fan of telehealth.
Yeah.
So there are some other questions. One is talking about obesity in children. So it's from Alejandro Busalo, and he says, in Los Angeles, obesity in children is becoming a public health problem. Some ideas on how to tackle this problem: education, exercise, question.
Yeah.
The
I'll start and
biggest
I'll get
challenge-
some help. I'll get some help from all of you on this. Yeah, it is a major problem worldwide. So, you know, and of course we're enormously concerned about this. I think the thing to recognize is this is not just overweight. We are seeing a real epidemic of severe obesity in children, obesity causing type 2 diabetes in children, which was previously unheard of. We have a substantial number of children who've had bariatric surgery because their obesity is so severe. We also have medications that are now being approved for children who have that severe obesity. To me, the way to go in childhood obesity is to have health systems approaches that are good for treatment, but to also not neglect prevention. And in fact, there's some studies that have been done in Portugal that show that we can be effective in preventing the development of obesity in children. Once children develop severe obesity, they need treatment. But before that, there are lots of things we can do. We can label our foods so that we know what we're eating. We can improve the formulation of foods. We can work into our curricula in grade school, healthy lifestyle education. So these measures, when implemented, work. They help prevent obesity. But remember, some kids are genetically predisposed to develop severe obesity, especially if they are challenged by what we call social determinants of health. So children who live in environments that are extremely stressful, who don't have access to a healthy physical activity environment or a healthy food environment, are at greater risk for obesity. So we need to address all of those things.
This was actually another question that we had, is if an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, then at the point normal weight enters overweight, who and how should they intervene? And it's an interesting question about prevention, but the problem is, as I said earlier, that people don't recognize that overweight is overweight. They think it's normal weight. As a matter of fact, I think it was in 2003, we had Jay Leno is one of our nighttime, he's retired now, but he had a nighttime show. And there was a study that came out that said 66% of Americans are overweight. And his joke was, if 66% are overweight, isn't that the new norm?
Yes, it is. That
Right.
is, yes.
So I mean, it was a great point, but I think part of this is getting people to understand what is overweight, but it also is very difficult to tackle on World Obesity Day, because what appears to be an issue in some cultures is not in others, as you made mention, Peter, earlier, right? So there are different ideals, and also we've seen that in certain populations, weight loss is good, and weight loss itself improves conditions, even if another group has more significant weight loss, but the conditions are improved in a similar manner. So I think an ounce of prevention is great, but so what are your answers to this?
Yeah, maybe I can add something from a German perspective and then European. Our experience is that the rate of obese children is significantly lower than in the US, but it's continuously increasing. And the biggest barrier against obesity treatment and obesity intervention in children are the parents. It's nearly 70% of the parents tell us, no, my child is not obese. There's no need to do anything about it. So it's not so difficult to motivate the children in the age of 10 to 14. But if the parents say no, then you have no choice. And there was a big European initiative, Feel for Diabetes, and they try to address how can we change behavior to prevent obesity in children, with the goal to later on prevent diabetes. And the common answer was you have to educate the children and the parents that the eating habit and family habits change, because this will prevent obesity in children. But this means addressing an age group of 3 to 9 years. And then this is often too late if we see an obese child. But acting in schools together with a teacher, together with the parents, introducing the old habit of eating together a healthy meal could be a start in tackling obesity in children.
Exactly. It's just two very brief reflections about this. One is that when we deal with globalization, we must be aware of that. In fact, vices are global, but virtues take too long to be global. So it takes time and it takes efforts. The other thing is that, again, with the example of children, is that the solution must be upstream, and upstream from children are their parents. And so it's the strategy should involve their parents. Children get two types of emotions about obesity. One could be when they get into school, they get bullied. It's very frequent, and that's a real problem. The other emotion that they could cope quite easily would be having their parents as their partners in their own, let's say, healthy habits. So I think, again, when we go upstream, either for parents or for doctors, that will be the answer for the prevention issue.
The problem is the parents are often like the child. They have a weight issue as well, so they may not be on board with reducing how much food Junior's eating when they're not doing it themselves. The other problem is they're often enablers. So you say to yourself, how could a 10-year-old kid prepare a meal for himself? And why is he eating so much? Where's the food coming from? And it turns out it's mom sneaking the food in because he's crying, I want more, I want more. So until you can get that problem solved, you're not going to be able to get the kids to eat better.
I think, as all of us who have children know, it is so hard to maintain any kind of peace in your house, and fighting your kids every day is so hard. So I do feel for all those parents, but you're right. It's why, a team approach to adolescent obesity is so important. I want to talk, there's a couple other questions, and one is really, maybe it's a question. Will it be beneficial adding learning topics about obesity pandemics in medical school curriculum as well as general education? And then after that, I want to ask you about our guidelines, because we have them, you have them, diabetes, ACE has them, which is the Endocrine Society, gastroenterologists have them. So we want to just kind of talk about that as well. But first, how are we going to change the mindset, right? Our students are always our future. Is it through health in high schools or at schools? There's always a health class talking about obesity, but maybe it's hard, because in high school, there's already so much societal cliques and assignations that it's hard to, discuss this without it being really torture for the heavy kids in school, or is it in medical school so we can talk about it?
Yeah, well, don't get me wrong, but I have really, it's not a conflict of interest, but that's why WGO is proposing two great topics to be discussed at the level of education, which is obesity and climate change. If we accept in our world nowadays that climate change should be an issue, teach or at least raising the awareness in schools and high schools, etc. Why not obesity? Because this is really a problem that it's getting everywhere. So I think these two topics are really new messages and new insights that we can propose to the new curriculum.
Scott,
it's a very interesting picture what you just raised, and I would say obesity is the individual climate change. We see it, but we don't act. And
it is. Scott, any chance that you're affecting changes in, and I said effecting changes in Harvard Medical School and the curriculum?
I haven't seen it. Obviously I don't spend much time in the first 2 years where they're in classrooms for their topics, but when they come onto the ward and they come into the hospital, we do get a chance to be exposed to them quite a bit. And I really don't see it. If I could just add one comment to Guilherme, you ought to check to see what the cafeterias are serving for lunch in these schools, because if they're serving hot dogs and hamburgers and chips, how are you going to convince this kid he should be eating apples and grapes and oranges?
That's true. And that's one of the reasons why, at least in my country, and I know that several European countries have been making legislation about that, about the type of foods that are available in the cafeteria of schools and even hospitals.
I was going to say hospitals, yeah.
It must be regulatory also, not only individual wishful thinking, but also regulatory issues.
There are some things that will help. We have the American Board of Obesity Medicine now. So people who are board certified in the United States can now take this certifying exam and get this additional credential. There are 5,000 board certified obesity medicine specialists. I think the pathway to surgical specialization has also really been fleshed out with fellowships for our bariatric surgeons. We have developed competencies. What that means is for different levels of healthcare providers, we have a list of things that those providers need to be competent in. So the development of those competencies was a big effort that was undertaken by the Obesity Society, and it's a good thing because it has been endorsed by many medical schools and professional societies. Another thing that has happened under the Obesity Society is development of standards of care. So much like in diabetes, we have a standard of care that's published every year in the United States that tells us what is the very best, the standard for managing diabetes. The same thing has been developed for obesity. So I think those things will help. I don't think we need to actually have a special course in obesity in medical school, it needs to be pervasive. It needs to be when we're studying surgery, when we're studying internal medicine, when we're studying pediatrics, when we're studying physiology. You know, it needs to be embedded in all of our medical education. This has not heretofore been the case, but I'm hopeful that it's going to happen. And part of what's driving it happening is the real advance in understanding the biology of obesity. I mean, how food intake is regulated, how body weight is regulated, how medications work, how surgery works. All of this science really makes us understand obesity as a disease.
I think I would say, though, a couple of years back, and I think the pandemic kind of halted it, there was a coalition of different organizations getting together to discuss how to implement kind of education of obesity in medical school curriculum. And I remember sending it to whoever was president at the time, saying, hey, we should be part of this discussion with them. And while I understand your point, it shouldn't be one lecture or lecture series on obesity, because we can certainly, microbiology can talk about obesity, because obesity is an inflammatory state. And what does that mean, right? So, but I do think that having that discussion, a really in-depth review of it, is helpful, because then it informs our medical students and then our residents as they go through all of those different rotations or different classes, to be like, oh, that's right, they talked about this, and it brings it back and ties it in. Let's talk about guidelines. ASMBS and IFSO put out new guidelines for bariatric surgery. We had made some changes, and it really was informed by all of the papers that have been put out, the randomized controlled trials, and also large series on what has happened, and great follow-up with patients who've had surgery. And we did change some of the criteria to BMI 30 to 35 if you had a comorbid condition. 35 and over, any patient would benefit from, as you said, Donna, a durable weight loss procedure. The reason I bring that up is I know that each one of your organizations have also put out new guidelines. And the question that was posed is it time for us? We always talk about multidisciplinary, it's the team. Is it time for all of us to team up on this World Obesity Day, to at least have that conversation, to come out with talking about all the treatments? Because it's a time that we put this out, and Scott, you can speak to this, as we put this out, all of a sudden, GLP-1 RAs were the weekly shots were coming out between semaglutide and tirzepatide, but we had our guidelines in place also. But I think the point I would make about surgical treatment, whether it's endoscopic or actual surgery, is look at it. People talk about this as a recurring disease and maybe a cancer model, but I would say even look at it as a heart model, right? Patient has cardiovascular disease, needs a heart stent. They get the heart stent. No one's stopping their antihypertensives or their anti-cholesterol meds, right? No one's doing any of that. So likewise with us, for us, we used to think surgery, yes, but then the longer you do it, you see that your patients struggle because it's weight recurrence, and so you have to give them another adjunct, which is medications to help them stay in the realm, rather than always saying everybody needs a revision. That's not always the case, and that's why actually in my practice I offer obesity treatment. Scott, talk a little bit about our timing of the guidelines coming out, but also we'd love to hear from World Obesity, as well as World Gastroenterology and the International Diabetes Foundation on what we're going to do with guidelines.
Of course, the timing it's long overdue. We went from 1991 to the current with the same set of guidelines, which is unprecedented in medicine. We just published an editorial, it hasn't come out yet, where I compared the guidelines to an antique car. And the point being, the antique car is beautiful. It's got great lines, it's a classic, but it doesn't drive so well. It doesn't have great brakes. It doesn't have an electronic system on board, no GPS. And that's the old guidelines. Yeah, they were great 31 years ago, but they're completely outdated, yet we continue to use them. So it was timely, if not long overdue. that we needed fresh guidelines that encompassed the randomized controlled trials that we've done because we were criticized we didn't have them in the past, the data that we're getting now with the results, complication rates, et cetera, and also the adjuncts such as the medical weight loss. I think personally down the road, patients are going to go home on something, take alongside their operation, you know, some medication, or possibly start one shortly after discharge, maybe when the weight loss starts to plateau a bit. I think the adjunct and the dual therapy is the future. So I think it's coming. And as far as guidelines, I think we're naturally getting closer together because we're all in agreement that each one is doing their part, GI, medical, surgical. So naturally, it's going to evolve into maybe one set of guidelines that fits everybody.
Yeah.
Well, in my perspective, guidelines currently are very clear enough. They provide several good pathways for management of this condition. But and when different societies like ours endorse or support other societies' perspectives, like we did recently, I think that's a great principle and a quite fair approach. But at the end, probably we are lacking that close collaboration we are all alluding to. As I have mentioned in last year's joint meeting with IFSO, we need to build a narrative throughout the medical and surgical community simultaneously to make crystal clear that there are complementary roles delivered by different insights and perspectives. Even though we consider ourselves many times as multitask doctors and generous, we struggle to achieve an ultimate solution from our own, we need to consider and assume in our own spirits that we are simply another piece of the obesity management puzzle. This multimodal approach should not frighten us. We must not consider this a battlefield of experts, but rather inspire everyone to contribute with timely, safe, and solid knowledge that we could share and successfully and progressively update. I think we are getting exactly on that time.
Okay. Any final thoughts from you guys before we?
There may be a kind of common understanding in terms of guideline from the diabetes community. The American Diabetes Association and the European Association for the Study of Diabetes are now on track every second year to update the guideline. And it's a common guideline from both organizations. And about 4 years ago, there was an enormous switch, or actually a shift in paradigm, and not saying we have to use this and this drug. We put the patient and the patient circle in the middle, and then look, what is the need of the patient? And we have to address this need. And one of the main needs is obesity. Because with all the GLP-1s and the tirzepatide, now we are moving into an option that we can treat obesity for our diabetes patient, but not for the obese non-diabetes patient, unfortunately. And I think this could be a kind of shift in paradigm also for the other organization, that we develop into a common understanding of the pathophysiological origin of common diseases, and that we have a more holistic approach to put the need of the patient in the middle and to address this by interventions, by coaching, and by drugs.
I agree. Donna, any final thoughts?
My final thought is, I believe we're at an inflection point in obesity prevention and obesity management. So what I see happening is a lot of things seem to be colliding in the United States. We've got some great new medications under review at our FDA, recently out on the market, that are producing unprecedented, robust weight loss. Our bariatric surgeons are doing well, and I see lots of multidisciplinary teams out there. I see a growing acceptance of obesity as a disease. I see a little less stigma. So I think we're going in the right direction, and I think we're almost at a point where it's going to take off. So for this World Obesity Day, I feel positive and optimistic. Part of that positivity is being here with my two colleague surgeons, being with World Diabetes, World Gastroenterology. This is teamwork, and that's what's going to make it happen. Thank you so much for including me in this.
Thank you for that. And I want to also add to our viewers, you know, in the US, we have the Obesity Action Coalition, which really speaks to fight bias and against obesity and patients with obesity. So I encourage, if your countries don't have that, please, you know, consider having something like that, because it goes a long way. It's mostly lay people who are involved, but there are medical counterparts as well. But it's a great program. You could certainly look that up as well. So again, I want to thank Donna Ryan from in her current hat of representing the World Obesity Organization, and then Dr. Peter Schwartz from International Diabetes Federation, and Guilherme Macedo from World Gastroenterology Organization, and Scott Shakura, IFSO. I am moderating. It was my pleasure to moderate, and I am the president-elect of the ASMBS. I want to thank all of you guys for watching. I hope it was informative, and thank you all for your questions. And again, it was such a pleasure to be here with all of you.
You did great.
Thank you very much.
Yes, you did.
Good
Thank you very
job,
much.
Marina.
Thank you
Bye,
very much.
everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.